Hello everybody, it's Lazel here with another Magic the Gathering EDH deck tech. Today we are taking a look at Atraxa, Praetors Voice. She is a 4-mana 4/4 legendary creature Phyrexian Angel Horror with Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink and at the beginning of your end step, Proliferate. Did you guys know that this color combination is called Witch-Maw? I didn't know that. Atraxa is an absolute powerhouse on itself, and in addition to that she allows us to play a bunch of different cards from all sorts of colors except red. There are a ton of ways of how you can play Atraxa. If I would build her on the first look, I would go for an Infect deck, which is how we are going to win. We will infect our opponents, bring those poison counters up to 10 and make them lose the game. For example, with cards like Rats, 3 mana 2/1 with Infect, and when Rats enters the battlefield, each player gets a poison counter. Sure, you also get one, but if you're the only Proliferate player at the table, you simply don't proliferate yourself and you're good to go. Infectious Bite is not only a great interaction spell, but it also gives all of your opponents a poison counter. 2 mana instant Infectious Bite. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, and each opponent gets a poison counter. Vraska's Fall. 3 mana instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker and gets a poison counter. Great interaction in the early game and you also poison your opponents. Infectious Inquiry, 3 mana sorcery. You draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. Each opponent gets a poison counter. If you don't have to interact with the board, just draw a few cards and also poison your opponents. Just as with Prologue to Phyrexia, 2 mana instant. Each opponent gets a poison counter, draw a card. And another great way to spread the infection is with Viral Drake, 4 mana 1/4 flying with Infect, and for 4 mana you can also Proliferate. Not only Atraxa will proliferate in this deck, we also have a bunch of more creatures that will help us to proliferate. For example, Bloated Contaminator, 3 mana 4/4 trample and Toxic 1. Whenever Bloated Contaminator deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. In my opinion, Bloated Contaminator is an absolute powerhouse. 3 mana for a 4/4 is already pretty solid, but also with trample and Toxic 1 and a proliferate mechanic on connect is really powerful. Experimental Augury, 2 mana instant. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Proliferate. As soon as we poison our opponents, we can look for more interaction with this card and also proliferate our opponent's poison counters. Non-Score Master doesn't only hit the theme here, it's also a very powerful creature. 5 mana 5/4 flying first strike, and whenever a commander you control enters the battlefield or attacks, proliferate. We also play Flux Channeler, 3 mana 2/2, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. Of course, Evolution Sage, 3 mana 3/2, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. Frummingbird, 2 mana 1/1 flying. Whenever Frummingbird deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. Due to the fact that this sneaky little 1/1 has flying, you will most likely connect at least a few times before your opponents handle it, but then it's often already too late. Let's say you just gave your opponents a few poison counters, maybe already proliferated. You will be enemy number 1 at the table, so you also need to look out for yourself. For example, with some Boardwipes like Wrath of God, 4 mana sorcery, destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Damnation, 4 mana sorcery, destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Supreme Verdict, 4 mana sorcery, this spell can't be countered and destroy all creatures. But my personal favorite is Phyrexia's Outbreak, 3 mana sorcery. Each opponent gets a poison counter, then each creature your opponent's controller get -1/-1 until end of turn for each poison counter its controller has. Keep your board intact while also killing your opponent's indestructible creatures if they have enough poison counters on the player. Aside from Atraxa, there are more powerful creatures in this deck. For example, Ixal, Scion of Atraxa, 4 mana 2/5, Flying, Vigilance and Toxic 2. Its corrupted mechanic says, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exiles the top card of their library face down. You may look and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. If you don't currently have an answer, maybe your opponents have them, so you just steal them with Ixal and generate a bunch of value with that. Glissa, Herald of Predation, 5 mana 3/5. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose 1. Incubate 2 twice, transform all incubator tokens you control, or Phyrexians you control gain first strike and death touch until end of turn. Sure, this one needs a few turns to get going, but once you have accumulated a few incubator tokens which you also proliferate onto at the beginning of your end step, you will end up with a nice army of Phyrexian incubator tokens. Brimmer's Blight of Oreskos, 4 mana 3/4. Whenever you cast a Phyrexian creature or artifact creature spell, incubate X, where X is that spell's mana value. And at the beginning of each end step, if a Phyrexian died under your control this turn, Proliferate. This card does a lot, and we also play a few Phyrexians in this deck, so there's some nice synergy in here. Atraxa requires a lot of different mana sources, but we definitely want to hit a few early ramp spells to make sure that we hit all of those different land types. For example, with spells like Free Visits, 4 mana sorcery, search a library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Nature's Lord, 2 mana sorcery, search a library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Farseek, 2 mana sorcery, search a library for a plains, island, swamp or mountain card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Sky Shroud Claim, 4 mana sorcery, search a library for up to 2 forest cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Circuit's Root, 4 mana sorcery, search a library for up to 2 basic land cards and or gate cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. This card is great, especially when you're playing a little bit more on a budget version and putting a few gate cards into your deck to hit all of those different mana symbols. And last but not least, probably the best ramp spell in this deck is Expand the Sphere, 4 mana sorcery. Look at the top 6 cards of your library, put up to 2 land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you put fewer than 2 lands onto the battlefield this way, proliferate a number of times equal to the difference. Maybe you don't need the lands anymore, but you can finish the game by proliferating just twice, you're good to go with this spell. Due to the fact that we are constantly proliferating in this deck, we play Everflowing Chalice, 0 mana artifact with Multi-Kicker 2. Everflowing Chalice enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked. We can tap it to add 1 colorless mana for each charge counter on Everflowing Chalice. We just keep proliferating this one and generate a bunch of mana with it. Just as with Astral Cornucopia. 3x artifact Astral Cornucopia enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. We can tap it to choose a color, add 1 mana of that color for each charge counter on Astral Cornucopia. Here are some more powerful cards that you want to proliferate. Simic Ascendancy, 2 mana enchantment. For 3 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Simic Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. This win con can be pulled off very fast in this deck, so don't underestimate it. Magistrat's Scepter, 3 mana artifact. 4 and tap, put a charge counter on Magistrat's Scepter. Tap it to remove 3 charge counters from Magistrat's Scepter to take an extra turn after this one. It's no problem to go for infinite turns with this card. Lux Cannon, 4 mana artifact. Tap to put a charge counter on Lux Cannon, and you can also tap it to remove 3 charge counters from Lux Cannon to destroy target permanent. Sling this together with a few extra turns and you can destroy a bunch of permanents of your opponents. And another really cool card to proliferate onto is Dawn of the New Age. 2 mana enchantment. Dawn of the New Age enters the battlefield with a hope counter on it for each creature you control. At the beginning of your end step, remove a hope counter from Dawn of the New Age. If you do, draw a card. Then, if Dawn of the New Age has no hope counters on it, sacrifice it and you gain for life. Well, this will never happen because we proliferate those hope counters and keep constantly drawing cards. You want to win more? You get it. Vorinclex, Monstrous Raider. 6 mana, 6/6 Trample Haste. If we would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. If an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of those counters on that permanent or player instead, rounded down. Tekufel, Inquiry Dominus, 4 mana 3/5 flying. If we would proliferate twice instead. And for 2 blue Phyrexian mana and 1 generic, remove 3 counters from among other artifacts, creatures and planeswalkers you control. Put an indestructible counter on Tekufel, Inquiry Dominus. And to top things off, Inexorable Tide, 5 mana enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. With all of these cards, one thing is very clear. As soon as you poisoned your opponents, the clock is ticking. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed all of these cards that I featured with Atraxa Praetors Voice as your commander. Let me know down in the comments below which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I shall feature next, and then I would say, see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.